will share the screen. Okay, so it should be one of these, and what I'm looking for is this one. Okay, everybody. Morning. As you know, I'm Chris Nichol. I look after Caselink at CCP, and usually you'll speak to me through issues, opening dates, or something that needs to be removed or added or changed, that sort of thing, or training. If you're brand new to the system, you'll sort of like hear me rabbit on for 2 hours talking about how to get things onto Caselink. Occasionally, though, I'll do a little session like this just to highlight a little tweak to the system. You're probably thinking, a tweak to the system. Last time we spoke as a group like this, it was to tell us we're getting a new system. Well, you still are. The new system is still due to be sort of like on the cards for next year. But this one was something that we asked Iconi to look at in the spring, really. And it's just taken them quite a while to sort of like get around to doing it, even though they charged us quite early on for it. It did take a while. Now, whether or not that's because it was slightly complicated, or whether or not that's because they no longer have the contract and it's been awarded to somebody else, so we're maybe not priority, I'll leave that to you to make that choice. Anyway, the things we've asked them to do is a couple of extra fields that Caselink had never asked about. And the reason why they were of interest is if you are a project who delivers particular things for Scottish Government, and these things are the Parental Employment Support Fund, No One Left Behind, Young Person Guarantee, and some of the PACE projects, the ones for redundancy. This is me, I do it on behalf of City of Edinburgh Council, but I know East Lothian Council do it, and I know some colleagues in Fife who are working on intensive family support also have to complete this, have to complete one of these sort of forms every quarter. A lot of this stuff we get from Caselink, no bother at all, start date, end date, those sort of things. But there were a few fields that weren't asked about. So we'd been asking these projects that were delivering these services to record this in a way where I then had to manually go into the notes box and take the data out and add it to this big Excel sheet that Scottish Government want to put in so that the whole picture of Scotland works. And those ones are this sort of one, parental status. So that is, have they got no children? Are they a children couple, or is it a single parent? We sort of had some markings on that, but not everything. So that was one that we asked about in the notes box. We also asked, they're also interested in this one, which is quite odd, religion, religious denomination or body. So we've got a field now for that. Again, with all of these, they're not mandatory, so don't feel like you have to complete them at all. There's a couple of things in their barriers which will be sort of looked at, and one of those is they're to do with rurality, really. I'm scrolling through, there it is. Does the person live in a remote rural area, or do they live in a rural area? Now that's a sort of distinct definition based on postcodes that the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation all works out. So all we needed was something to automatically identify from a postcode whether or not it fitted within one of these two. It doesn't really matter for Edinburgh because there isn't really any of those there. The closest we get, I think, is Kirkliston, which might be a rural area, but by and large it's not there. But obviously East Lothian and Fife, and particularly Borders, might have a few more of those, so that's why they're on there. And then there's a couple of other ones which I'm just going to scroll along here to show you, and it's these ones. Number of children of a parent, well, we've got that's been in Caselink already. Is there a disabled child within the family? That was never asked, so that had to be put in manually in the notes box. Now we've got a box to tick on that one. The age of the child, the youngest child, in months. We never had that either. So again, some organisations were recording that properly and I was able to take it through. Others would sort of like do it in a slightly half-hearted way. So we're trying to sort of like make sure it's all a bit tidier and we're able to report back to Scottish Government accurately on these figures, as opposed to saying we don't know, nobody's answered it. So the projects that this most impacts are those ones that I mentioned. If you're working on the old activity agreements type provisions through No One Left Behind and working with young people, these are the sort of ones you're wanting to look at. If you're the Parental Employment Support Fund projects, they're there as well. But just to highlight to everybody, these new barriers are popped up. So if you want to use them, You're perfectly entitled to do it, whether or not you're one of these projects or not one of these projects. If you want to ignore them, again, perfectly entitled to ignore them. But I just wanted this session to sort of like, I don't know, give you a heads up of where these are, just to make sure that you're aware that they are new. They only sort of came into being the last week or so. Just to sort of like clarify what you really need to do with them. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to share the screen to show you what they'll look like on Caselink. So back onto this, and stop sharing that one, and then share my Caselink screen. It should be in here somewhere. There we go. Okay. So I've got here one of my made-up clients, Freddie Football, and basically for all of you that are Caselink old hands, or for those that are going to be coming on, well, for those that are Caselink old hands, you'll know this. It's the bit where you put in the assessment of the client, and if it's a client who's worked with somebody else, that assessment is in this bit, funder details. For every client who's brand new, who's never been on the system before, you get exactly the same stuff, but it's done as the registration. It's the very first time they go on it. I'm just using this one because it's the easiest one to access to show you. So as you know, there'll be the initial questions. Are they out of work? Yes, no, whatever answer you put in, it routes them through. So they're exactly the same as they've always been. The equality ones, exactly the same as they've always been. The 3 mandatory fields, highest qualification, ethnic origin, and their gender, which is pulled through from the other one. The barriers and target groups, ESF, there's no difference at all on here. If I'd have added them into here, which was an option, it might have looked neat and tidy, but if you'd have then ticked that there is a disabled child in the household, that would have counted as one of the 2 applicable ESF barriers. Or if not, we would have had to get something else built so that it flagged it up saying this one doesn't count, you need to pick another one or something. So it would have been rather complicated to have had that in there. Probably confusing for the ESF projects that are still using this one. So where we've put them, these new barriers, is this bit, barriers, target groups, non-ESF. And we can see in here, for any of you that have sort of like got a Caselink memory and sort of like thinking, oh, I can see that, there's a brand new barrier in there, there was never used to be. There it is, disabled child in the family, that's the one I was mentioning. So if there is, you tick it. If there isn't, you don't tick it. If you've never asked it, you ignore it entirely, don't worry about it. It's just those projects that we'd have to specifically look at it. The No One Left Behind, PESF, and the other ones that I mentioned at the start. There's these ones to do with system generated. So it basically works out from something else you've put into the system as you've been registering that client, whether or not any of these things work. And that's where we're going to get those to. The postcode, if the postcode matches up with that specific list, remote rural area or rural area, we'll see a tick in there. We can't go in and do it because it's system generated. We'd have to change the postcode of Freddie Football so that he was living in one of these rural areas to mark it up. As I say, not a massive issue for the Edinburgh projects, but as we go out in the city region, that will become a little bit more critical for those that are remote rural areas. There's this one, age in months of the youngest child, so we just put it in. It's 45 months or whatever it is, that's fine. The parental status, there's a drop down in there, children couple, no children, single parent. I kind of have marked that one up as mandatory. I'm going to try and see if we can get that switched back off to, so it's not mandatory. That's what it should have been when we put the request in. So we need to have a quick look at that one. Religion, again, we can happily ignore it entirely because it's not mandatory. We can, if we're wanting to say, prefer not to say, and then we can leave it at that. So again, it's only of relevance particularly to those specific projects that are funded through these funding streams. No One Left Behind, PESF, PACE, and the sort of young person guarantee ones. So for the rest of you, you can just happily just pretend it never existed. And that's it really. That's what we're seeing. These additional bits here on the barriers, target groups, non-ESF. And it was really just to flag up that that's what's happening. That's where they've come from. That's why I've added them and what you should do with them. If you're one of the specific projects that this is relevant and you will know who we're talking about, that's something you're going to have to look at. If you're not, you can happily ignore it entirely. But it might be of interest, you know, if you're working with folk who are looking after children with disabilities or whatever, that might be something you've wanted to record in here. And now there is an option to do it. It's up to you. It's not like a one-size-fits-all sort of recommendation of how you complete this. So it's up to you and your project. Okay, I think that's probably me done. So I'll just stop the video if I can get back into the screen. So where are we in here? Stop recording.